A new draft for a naturalization law had been proposed by our Ministry of Interior under Horst Seehofer. It initially included a section that would prohibit the endowment of our citizenship to people who have more than one wife. Strange enough, when this law was presented to the Ministry of Justice, this very section was removed. And the minister, Katharina Barley, claims that she removed it to focus on the coalition treaty and what is already written there. Now, I think this is a very technical and stupid excuse, but I will, for the sake of fairness, explain why this could make sense. Well, first of all, polygamy is forbidden in Germany. So if you are found out to be married to more than one wife, you actually get punished. So you could argue that it is unnecessary for a naturalization law to also look into if somebody has a wife or not, and then to withhold a citizenship from that person. Now, I do understand that that could come with some extra bureaucracy, but maybe also not. Maybe you just need somebody to testify, and if that statement is false or is found out to be false later, then the individual has to be punished for two things. That is for speaking, giving false testimony to an authority, and for the polygamy itself. So it would actually make sense to have that included, and I think it would not make much more bureaucracy. What is strange is that it was silently removed, that there was no open debate about it, because obviously we do have a problem with polygamy. More and more people are coming in who have multiple wives, and some have wives who are underage. And also our family structures are breaking down, and there are some people, they are calling this polyamory or something like that, who are not happy with just having one wife, and it's now happening in the Western world too, which brings me to a cultural thing that we hardly speak about. When people say Islamization, they very often mean they're just more Muslims, and they introduce their lifestyles, among themselves, and then they have many children, and you see people kowtowing to how the minority behaves until they become a majority, and then everybody's got to behave like that. But what I see is that actually the lifestyles and ideas float around on themselves. It is not just then Afghans and Arabs who have multiple wives, but it just becomes fashionable. Because people, just pick up ideas, and if it's okay for Ali and Mohammed to have more than one wife, why not you? And you must remember a lot of the 1968 hippie culture. They had pilgrimages to Kabul back then. It was not yet taken by the Taliban. It was a rather a comparatively modern society back then, but still they would find these traditions in some places, and at that time everything looked more, or in their mindset, everything looked more liberal than the Western world. Of course, this was an illusion. They were on holiday, so the holiday was what came across as liberation, and not the lifestyles that they actually found where they went. But this is where it actually came from, or that's part of the explanation. And other pilgrimage stop with Algeria in Northern Africa, and of course then there is this entire debate, and men have their natural drive. I could talk a bit more about how monogamy is valuable, and how it it strengthens our society and is maybe the rock bottom on which we build our freedom and our prosperity. But maybe I should shift that to other YouTubers who are a bit more knowledgeable about it. I think there are a lot of female YouTubers who speak about relationships and their dynamics, who do a great job. So I will speaking or filling the voids of what I've already said, because there are some things that you wonder about probably, and that is, for example, how a bill can move from ministry to ministry rather than from a chamber of parliament to the other chamber of parliament, which is what you would expect in a democracy, wouldn't you? And the other thing is that a minister would say, "Oh, it's not in a coalition treaty, so I will just not deal with it. I don't care what." This basically comes to the same root, and that is that we do not actually have a real separation of power. And here I must be careful, because in Germany, I have mentioned that a number of times, we have a postmodern ideology. We just claim, we pay lip service to all democratic principles, but in the end, they are actually not put into practice. And an example of this is that our executive branch is not separate from the parliament, and it is not even that the parliament controls the executive branch, which is one step in the development of the democracy in Great Britain. But it is the other way around. The executive branch under the Chancellor controls the Parliament. I will explain that in a minute. But first, maybe I should say that in Great Britain, before the monarch ceded all the powers and became a purely ceremonial role, he used to be the executive, and he was controlled by the Parliament, by the budgeting. And this is also how America drafts its relationship between the Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, and the President. This is how our Western system evolved originally. Now in Germany, this is very different. In Germany, the Chancellor and the ministers control how the Parliament works. The reason for this is how we elect our parliament, and this is such a big story that I just can give you a wrap up. Now, we do have a proportionate voting system, and this is a huge part of the explanation. The individual parliamentarian does not represent a certain place, it represents the party. Now this is a collectivist idea, and very foreign to most English speakers, but in most cultures in Germany, you think in the terms of collectives, and the people can only choose, or they have two votes, and this is where the explanation gets very messy. They have two votes, and one decides what proportion a party gets, and the other is supposed to give the seats to a representative of the constituency. Now this does not really work as it should. Both options for the voter are actually decided by the party leader in one way or another. Now these lists, who is presented to the voter as a candidate for the parliament, they are compiled by the party leader, so you cannot just select somebody who has no party and run him into the parliament. Technically, this would be an option, technically, but in reality, there is you have to join a party first, and then they decide if you are if you can be. They decide to what region you are supposed to be the representative, and they decide as a second vote to what portion, or rather on what place on the list you will be. Now, this is so difficult. I'm so sorry to go through all of this. Now, when a party A has 40% of the votes, it means that the list from top to the first, I don't know how many seats that represents 40%, but it just counts down the list compiled by representatives of the party who moves into the parliament, and that is not even the full story, because how do you match these two systems? I could go on and on and on. It is very difficult. The list that I've just explained that will be run down and assigned seats in the parliament. It is not even directly compiled by the party leader, but it comes from the representatives of the lower regions. It is very messy, so I will not go into detail. I have already confused you, but the reality is that the party leaders decide who comes into the parliament, and this makes them bound, keeps them in thrall of these party leaders. They have then the power to decide who can be there on the next election, and by that they have perfect control over the voting behavior of the parliamentarians. Now, our constitution claims that our MPs are free to vote as they please, but of course the reality is that they are strongly bound to the leaders, to the mechanism as I roughly explained it. This is so well known that the parties, and you will find that in English-speaking media, the party leaders can just sit together and decide who will vote in what manner over the next 4 years on what issues. So after each election, they write up what laws will going to be drafted and passed in the parliament. So it takes them 2 weeks to decide what is going to be done over the course of the next 4 years, and they just put through that program afterwards. It does not allow any changes, and it aggregates the power in the hands of a few. It is very problematic, and there is absolutely nothing in the constitution that would justify it. But the reality is that the party leaders control the entire parliament, and not just the party leaders, but here's the next step: the parliament actually votes the ministers. So the parliament, directed by the party leaders, will choose what minister is run by what person. Now, this gives the entire control again to the party leaders, who pick friends of theirs. So the executive, so while formally all the ministries, including the chancellor, is elected by the body of the parliament, the legal body, the reality is that the parliament is controlled by the party leaders who gun for these executive roles. They care for the executive roles first, and that is where they put their friends. So when you go to the election formally, you just vote for the parliament. In reality, you know already, and this is how it is advertised, in reality you vote the executive. You vote the chancellor in the general election. Of course, it is not so blatantly advertised. You're always given a double speak in Germany. They speak of chancellor candidates, for example, but in reality, the voter does not elect a chancellor. Or in formal reality, the voter does not elect a chancellor. He elects the parliament, and the parliament is actually controlled by the party leaders, who do get your vote through an arcane voting system that has so many traps I cannot explain it in this video. So ultimately, the party leaders select the ministries and the chancellor, who is usually one of the party leaders, and they guide everything what the parliament does. I hope this was not too tedious, because I think when I make this channel, I want to give a bit more information than Paul Joseph Watson or Black Pigeon Speak can provide, because they see the calamities as they unfold and they raise awareness, and I'm very grateful for them to do this. But they have not the power to actually explain to the world outside what led to these problems, and they cannot warn America, Canada, Great Britain, and so on what traps there are, what could cause them to fall as deep as we are probably going to fall. So I'm sorry if that was a bit too technical and if I was not so fluent explaining this. It is very difficult to actually go into technicalities that do not have representation in a different language. So my apology for that, and I hope you enjoyed it anyways, and see you soon. Bye.